So I realised that Rich has put me on at this time of the day because this is when people started to get a little bit tired. But what his big mistake was putting himself last when he wants to go for a beer, right? So, and the other reason why Rich put me probably at this time of the day is because I'm a little bit loud and not always PC. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Steve Knutson. I'm the one of the directors of Stratus Technology Partners, which I started 11 and a half years ago now. We have two parts of the company. We have software engineering side, and we have Microsoft 365 Power Platform side, which is the bit that I like the most. And that's my team down there, who are awesome, by the way. We're going to beat Brighter Days at softball. That's also something we're going to do, because apparently Lee, who isn't here to defend himself, has no hand-eye coordination. So, I've got lots of resources online. If you interested, I've got a blog. It's mostly about SharePoint, but it's got some SharePoint Power Platform, mostly about Automate related stuff in there. I did a blog a long time ago about how to build a multi-page Power App that's had millions of hits on it. And I don't know why people, because it was so basic. Back then it was probably hard. Now it's pretty simple. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and there's my email address if you feel like you want to reach out and get hold of me, or just follow along and listen to some random stuff. So I noticed that my team had better icons and stuff like things too. They didn't do my slides, I did them myself. So this talk is about pulling it all together, and the topic idea came up when I was talking to Rich, and then afterwards I walked straight out of the room and thought, what does that mean? So I thought I'd make this talk about sort of non-technical stuff, talk a bit about citizen developers, talk a little bit about professional developers. We call low-code platforms development platforms these days, but sometimes this actually extends into actual .NET type developers as well. Some approaches and things to consider, and other stuff that pops into my mind while I'm talking to you. Okay, so I'm going to just start, I thought, with sort of doing a wee survey of where your organisation is today. And for those of you that don't know, that's a fire going on behind the dog. So if you're doing Power Platform and you haven't started yet, you're probably not in this room. I'm assuming everybody here has already started doing something. Who's just dipping their toes? A few people just dipping their toes. What about you're completely out of control? It's like the next stage. So you dip your toes and you're completely out of control because you forgot to do what Vanessa said, right? You forgot to do the governance bit. You're regaining control. So I've talked to quite a few organisations that are trying to regain control because they got out of control. Usually it's related to teams, but it also relates to Power Platform. And what about this is fine? Yeah. Yeah. I've got another category on there which you can just write in the box if you feel like it. So I guess the point is that we're all at different points in our journey, and often when we started out with Power Platform about 5 years ago when Microsoft released it, there were no tools to manage it. Some people started early. They went off individually. They did lots of different things. I'm going to talk about one of the things at the end of this from the keynote speech that I completely disagree with. And I've got a very good reason why, which I hopefully will articulate as we go through this. So how do we get better? We need to gain control of the environment, at the same time giving power to business. So we don't want to gain control of the environment and strangle it. We want to gain control of the organisation, or what's going on inside the organisation, put some control around it, but continue to empower the business. And I think that's the core thing that you want to do with your governance. If you strangle it too much, then nobody will get to take advantage of the platform and you won't get the benefits. If you're too loose, it'll be wildly out of control. The fire will be going on behind you, and you'll be blissfully unaware because you would look, right? If you don't look over there, there's not a problem. Who works in an IT department? Some of these next things might resonate with you if you work with IT people, especially old ones, and especially the blokes that plug your network cables and stuff in. So overheard conversations in the IT department. Isn't Power Platform the new Microsoft Access? Hands up if you agree. Okay, excellent. We don't want people using these tools. How do we turn them off? How How much will it cost? Everybody knows that question, right? And the last, what happens if X leaves and we have to support this? Emoji, yeah, right. I'm sure you've heard all of these comments and more, right? When you're thinking about the Power Platform in particular, but also other things that we've done in IT over the years. If you're old, yeah, you might have heard these things. Like Rich has probably heard these things about SharePoint 2010, 2007 maybe, 2003. Yes. I try to gauge his age just by watching his facial expressions. Yeah. So these are the sorts of things that people say to your face about Power Platform when you mention it, right? So these are the things that they're not afraid to say it. But what this should do is indicate to you that these are the things that we should be trying to avoid. We should try to prove them wrong. So I think one of the first things to understand is, why do we need the Power Platform in the first place? Well, the thing is, we need some powerful and flexible tools to allow us to get on with lots of things that can't currently be done. We heard in the keynote this morning that that's about things such as a lack of software developers. And if you happen to be an owner of a company that has a software development team and you need to get work done with them, you'll know, speaking from personal experience, that it is months of lead time, not days of lead time. And the costs are slightly higher than the costs of Power Platform, or massively higher, depending on which way you want to look at it. Right? There's an order of magnitude difference often in the cost. Power Platform is actually easy to secure, relatively easy to secure compared to custom development. There's a whole lot less to think about because Microsoft's thought about a lot of that for you, and that helps get past the security team. Anybody try to get past the security team in a bank? Not the physical security team, the guys with the handcuffs and guns and stuff, but the actual IT security team. Vanessa has, so have I. Yeah, and and they will ask you questions that you haven't been asked by anybody else, right? And that's a good thing because it makes you think about what you're doing. You can integrate it into other things natively. It's got integrations into Microsoft 365 and Dynamics and beyond, so you can plug it into SAP if you want to. And overall, development is generally faster. So these are some of the kind of some reasons why. The next thing to think about is, why do we need citizen developers? Let's start with, the world is full of inefficient manual processes, and we all see these inefficient manual processes. And so the first thing, that to be able to solve those, we need tools. Professional developers in demand, and we can't do everything. I wrote that before I heard the keynote. We want to improve our personal productivity. So we've got people that want to do small things. And Lisa mentioned this morning. There's different orders of magnitudes of things. We want to improve the team's productivity. So that's not just the individual, but the team or even the company. So some of these things can be company-wide, organisation-wide. The business improvement team needs tools to be able to experiment and prove ideas. So before they go out and spend millions of dollars on something, they might want to experiment by trying to do something at a smaller scale with lower cost, faster to implement tools. And before they then go, yes, this is what we need, now let's build the real thing. Or, as we all know, the prototype always becomes a production system, right?
But it will continue to live in the dev environment.
That's right. It will continue to live in the dev environment. And that is the key thing to remember, because the dev environment is not secure. Yeah. Okay. I could go on. All right. So let us, our job as consultants and as leaders in our teams and people leading groups of citizens developers, is to prevent them from becoming Halloween memes. So there was a whole lot of these memes going around last week, and this one here is a great one. I don't know if you can read it, but I'm just going to read this out here. Been using Excel as a database for years. Hands up if you've done that. Yeah, Thomas says he's admitting it. Thanks, Thomas. The first thing to do is to admit you have the problem, right? You've recently found Power Apps in SharePoint. Hands up if you've recently discovered these tools. Yeah, okay. So we've got some more people admitting what they're doing. You've been shown the desktop booking app. Yeah, right. Okay. You're now heading into low-code application practice for a multi-million-dollar company or organisation. Who's leading a Power Platform practice for a large organisation? No one. Everyone's too scared to. Excellent. Okay. And finally, still use Excel because SharePoint apps require additional licensing. Thomas, that'll be you still, right? Yeah. I'm sorry. I've only just met Thomas today, but I didn't really want to take the mickey out of him. But he did answer yes to the first question. So what can we do to help our citizen developers be better? The first thing is set some boundaries that are easy to identify. As I was listening to Vanessa's talk this morning, I was like ticking off in my head the things I had in my same slide. So this will be sounding familiar. I'm just saying it differently. But listen to what Vanessa had to say. It's important. Basic design standards. Have some coaching and limit the business impact if they get it wrong, because people will make mistakes. It's important probably to think a little bit about who's going to create what is a fairly important part of the puzzle. So for our professional developers, we want to look at things like business-wide processes, so larger scale things. The documentation requirements might be higher. Typically, you'd expect that there'd be some sort of requirements analysis first, right, before you start building. It might have integration to other systems. It might have a large user base across a wide number of people. It could have high impact for breaks. Or be working with enterprise data. So these are just some of the things that if you tick one of those boxes, you think this should really be something that is done by a planned professional team. So the professional team can be an internal team, but dedicated or focused on delivering the applications. And their skill level is probably a little bit higher, but not only the skill level, they've been tasked with that job. It's part of their job, right? Versus a citizen developer. So the citizen developer usually starts around personal productivity. So send me a text message if I get a notification from something. If an email comes in, pop it into this list or tag it in this category or something similar. So those sort of more, not trivial, because they're not trivial to that person, but things that are there to benefit the individual more than the organisation. They're not generally business critical. So if the email fails to trigger the notification, it's not the end of the world. It's a minor inconvenience. It has a low impact for breaks. It's got a small user base. So we don't want citizen developers necessarily, at least until they're more experienced building things that go wide across the organisation. It might have a limited lifetime need. So it might be something that they're building for a short period of time. An example we had recently was an exercise where people were going to do tree planting, and the organisation needed a way of capturing and allowing people to schedule in. So they built a wee app to allow people to sign up for a tree planting day. They had a list of choices that popped the data into a SharePoint list, sent them an email saying, "Hey, thanks, that's awesome," and then the manager could approve them being away that day. And it could be you could restrict the data sources. Well, in fact, you shouldn't restrict the data sources, right? You shouldn't probably have the citizens looking at your enterprise data unless they've passed some sort of driver's license test of some sort to understand what it is they're doing. Another thing to think about is the topic that Rich decided not to talk about before: licensing. So licensing for Power Platform, we all know, is challenging. But it's a very important part of the puzzle. So when we're deciding what we're going to use, we need to really think hard about the licensing, because that can be, over the lifetime of the app, a very substantial cost. I'll give an example. We looked at the cost of a Power App for an organisation that required around 40 users of that app. If you then went for the premium per user license, that's $32 per month times 40. The expected lifetime of this app is greater than 5 years. So it's taking quite a large OpEx cost coming in, and somebody should approve that before you do it, right? It shouldn't be. It should be something that's planned and considered, not just, I'm going to build it for my one user, and then when we go and roll it out to everyone else, go, now we need to buy licensing. We go, but we've got no budget. And so you need to think about the licensing very carefully. So that will determine what data sources you use, which model you use. Do you go per user, per app, per run? Do you use portals? So I built a health and safety incident form. Who needs to have access to that form? Everyone, right? Everyone needs the ability to create the form in the organisation. How many people actually do? Assuming it's a small number of a subset of the organisation, right? So that might determine what type of license you use, because you might not want to go a full per user license per user for the entire organisation on the chance that they might fill that form in once. You'd be better looking at one of the other licensing models. A really good approach you can take to this is actually create a spreadsheet, put down and count the number of apps people will need, and just do some rough maths. The rule of thumb, if you're going to use more than 4 apps, then you're best per user in most cases. So just have a think about the licensing needs there.
I also think that it's also good to go to market shelf product, like let's say health and safety in particular is one of the ones
Very.
quite competitive pricing from off-the-shelf products that require minimal configuration you don't have to manage.
Yeah, indeed. That's actually another question, which is, should you build this in Power Platform at all? Sometimes it doesn't make sense.
If we have bought per user license,
yeah.
So if the staff employees are left in the company, is it possible to transfer that?
Yes. Yeah, the licenses can. So in the per user licensing, the user is assigned to the person.
Yeah.
In the per app licensing, you assign people to apps.
So the per user license.
Yeah, it's transferable. You could transfer it. You could move it 3 or 4 times a day if you wanted to, but you wouldn't. But you could. Yeah. You've also got other costs that you might incur. So I've got one on here, which is that other premium connectors to other applications. So SAP, for example. So if you've got SAP as your ERP system, you will need to pay an additional amount for the data connector for that. Plus there'll be some SAP licensing incurred as well. And there's also things like if you're using AI Builder, for example, AI Builder models have a cost to run them. I won't get into AI Builder, so it's not really my area, but just be aware it's not free. Right? So when you start using those tools, there's a cost to them. So understand the cost before you start building is a good idea.
100.
Yeah, per month minimum. So if you're using it to analyze business cards from people that drop them into your booth at the Digital Workplace Conference, might not be necessarily the most cost-effective way to do it, especially if your brighter days and only a handful of cards to drop them. If anybody would like a decent pen, some of the box down the back. We also need to consider how many people are going to use the app. So it might be that you only have a very small number of people that need this app, and it makes total sense to give them the premium licensing because they are important users of that. And then the last question is who pays. Right, so someone is ultimately going to pay for the licensing. So have a think about who it is that's paying for that licensing. It might be that the business unit that's buying that app needs to acquire the licensing as part of their business case, and they'll include the licensing in that. If you haven't got a business case, then what are you doing? Are you building something because you think this is a good idea, and you're doing it kind of in stealth? Then that may be not the best approach. Yes. Yes. Yeah. 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 That's a good one. Yes. Yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, API capacity, API limits are and actually run limits, JSON payload that comes back, and you've then got to try and parse that payload. And a few things that happen is, firstly, the SharePoint site had thousands of documents in it. Second thing is the API only brings back 500 at a time maximum.
No, you can set that to 5,000.
No, for the SharePoint search API, you can. Yeah.
There's a hardcode override in Graph. I found that I had to. It was awful, but you can do it.
You can do it. Oh, there you go. Oh, So this solution didn't happen in the end, but so this is an example of something that failed because we got to a point where two things happened. One was we had to iterate through each of the results to get the items out because we needed to pull out the document title, URL, and a managed property, and then we needed to based on the managed property, we needed to do different actions. So we had this big loop going, right? So that's cool. It worked. You'd run this thing, and within 5 minutes, it would have downloaded and created the output and generated the file that I needed with all the data in it. So that was cool. And then they came and said, well, actually, this thing's not going to run on 50 documents, which is what they told me at the start. It's going to run on thousands of documents. So not so cool. So now the problem is that the number of actions in Power Automate start hitting the action limits. So the maximum number of activities that you can do in a per day. And we also started hitting API limits as well. So there are limits. They are not as big as you can expect, and it's easy to get it wrong especially if you've got loops happening within your workflows. Lots of steps. So we abandoned ship and went for a completely different approach to the problem in the end. The thing was to remember when to abandon ship. Don't leave it too late. Don't be afraid to stop if you're getting it wrong. Another thing that you should really think about, and this is something that we see a lot, is your design and UX standards. So I was presented to a fantastic app, actually somebody showed me, and on the surface it looked brilliant. And the app had, along the top of it, a wizard kind of style app. So you go through a series of screens, and there's about 6 screens, and on about the third screen it had a piece where it had the images. So the person would take this app, and it was like a field inspection app, similar to what Thomas was doing. It wasn't Thomas's one though, and there's no Excel involved. So, but we get to the third page on the app, and it's got a space for the photograph, except that the camera control was on the 6th page to the app. So you then across the 6th page, there was no button to take you back to the 3rd page, which would have been obvious, right? So click here to go to page 6 to take a photo, then go back to page 3 and upload the photo from the device into the control, right? They just hadn't thought about the actual order of events of what things were happening. The cool thing was they passed all of their testing. It was out in production with quite a lot of field workers, and nobody complained because the best way to not get complaints, be completely unapproachable, and that way people won't complain, right? They won't complain, but they'll grit and bear it. They thought it was good because the previous system was actually worse than what the one they had. So it was a vast improvement on what they had, but it still wasn't great. But a few things to think about. Branding. Companies like it to look like their corporate brand. Right? Problems with branding. Contrast. Contrast can be, especially if you've got people that are outside working on tablets in bright sunlight or in dimly lit workplaces, maybe. People that are colourblind, those are the sorts of things you need to think about with your contrast. There is thinking about the palette and how you use colour in that's really important. Fonts and button sizes for the same reasons, especially if you're working with an ageing workforce where people's eyesight's not as good as it once was, and the font size is no longer 8, it's no longer appropriate. You maybe want to bump it up to 20. Yeah. I'm glad you said that. So, navigation standards. So like I was saying before about how do you move around the app? Can I go back? If I go forward to another screen, can I go back to the previous screen? When I do that, what happens? Things to think about. When do I submit data? Am I submitting it per form, or am I collecting it, patching it at the end? Naming conventions. Who takes the time to name the screens in their Power Apps? Okay, good. Right, Rich passed. Excellent. And just think about things like your organisation's specific needs. So some organisations might have unique needs to their organisation. Maybe you've got a bilingual workforce. Maybe you've got things which are specific to your organisation that must appear because they're part of your brand values or culture of your organisation. Whatever you do, don't just create like the default form with some boxes on it and stuff, because that's functional but doesn't meet all of the other human needs, right, around being connected to what they're doing and so on. So how do you learn all this stuff? Everybody, this has already come up a few times today, but here's a short list. Definitely sign up to the Microsoft Learn website and do at least the basic courses on there. It's quite addictive. You'll learn things that you didn't think you needed to know. But here's a tip. Don't just focus on Power Platform. There's other things you need to know also. So it's good to stretch yourself over and have a look at the Azure stuff. Have a look at some of the other things that are on there. The Graph API Explorer. If you're in for a bit of fun, that's quite a cool thing to go and have a bit of a tinker with. Get the Postman and then try and contact it. There's a video on my blog if you want to know how to use Postman. Shows you just how to do something very simple. It's kind of a cool little thing if you've never used the API before. And then you'll go down the rabbit hole. So make sure you don't do it first thing in the morning or just before you're about to go home at night. Right? So get yourself a Microsoft Developer Tenant. It is free. We'll post the link somewhere, Rich, on how people get that if you haven't got one or if you don't know how to get one. Give us a shout. It's free. You get your own Microsoft 365 tenant and you are the master of your own domain. So, you're not controlled by IT's MFA policy. But perhaps you should be. And it does enforce MFA now. Yeah. One thing I'd just say is just don't put like your client identifiable data in your development tenant. It's probably a good place not to keep it. Keep it probably in the proper place.
You get 20 licenses. Right?
Yeah, you do, and it's got pre-populated names, pre-populated users, so you can it's got all the tools. It's cool. The Tech Community website and the Power Platform Community website, both excellent resources, places where you can ask questions and see what other sorts of questions people are asking, and follow the blogs from the platform teams, so you'll find out and keep current with what's going on. It's vast, so somebody said earlier, just pick a narrow topic and focus on the things that you're really interested in there. There's tons of stuff on YouTube. I've heard Reza Durrani's name come up a few times today, but Richard has got a fantastic YouTube channel also. Well, that's nothing been updated on there for about a year. No. Ask him a question, and if he doesn't answer, then ping him on a different channel. Yeah. Attend events like this and join user groups as well, because there's lots of people that are at all different stages in their developing their skills and so on. So it's good places to go. So that's some learning things you could take on. The next slide is really just about how to go about doing things. If you're at the very beginning of your journey, start by piloting something small. Pick something small, try it out, and the steepest part of the learning curve is the first day of Power Platform. It progressively gets easier and then gets harder again, and then gets easier. And then the reason why it gets harder again on the third time is because each time you do something, someone is going to see it, and then they're going to ask you to do something a little harder than you did last time. So you're going to grow. So be prepared for that. I was going to put up a graph. Has anybody seen that graph? I couldn't find it of the psychological state of the software developer. And it starts off like this optimism. I'm up really high, and then they start working, happy, and then they dive very steeply into the depths of despair, trying to solve a problem that they've never struck before, and they're stuck there for a while. And then they solve it, and they shoot back up again, and they go, all of a sudden they're happy again. And then the next one happens, and they sort of go up and down like this, and eventually, at the end of it, there's an awesome product. All right, so but it's not a linear thing. So there's lots of challenges. If anybody's been stuck in a difficult bug, you'll understand how frustrating it is when you get it and you can't fix it, and how satisfying it is when you solve the problem. Right? So start small. I've put retro on here. Think about what you learned from that first one. Actually talk to your team around you, the people that you're working with on this stuff, and go, what have we learned? What can we do better? What don't we know that we need to know? Come up with a list of stuff. Do something more. The next one's going to be a little bit bigger than what you did before. And then the blue stream might be your in-house developers. At this point here, you're starting to get brave, and you're going, no, right now we're ready to train someone else. Okay, so the best way to learn something is to teach someone else how to do it. So these guys here, you see this team down here, the citizen developers how to do something, and then they stop and they go, what would we do better next time? And then away they go, right, and then they shoot off, and then next thing you know, we get this next problem, which is citizen developers are building like twice the speed of the professional guys. And they're going, we're awesome, we get do the stuff so quickly. And they're going, yeah, but we have to do documentation. They go, we don't. And I go, well, which brings me to my next point, which is to be professional, even if you're a citizen, right? So just because you are a citizen developer doesn't mean you shouldn't be a good citizen. And a good citizen is about looking after the people around you and the people, the organisation you work for. So a few things here. Starters, seek approval before you build. So at least ask somebody or tell them what you're doing before you do it. Don't build it and then go, here's this awesome thing. And they go, oh, we were going to do that and this other thing over here. That's an HR process, or it's going to happen in a different system. Don't just go away and build it. Have a test plan. Because if you don't, I'm sure you're going to hit one of those deep dives of despair very quickly. Because even things which seem quite trivial can have lots of fish hooks. Has anyone done a document approval workflow in Power Automate? What happens when the approver gets the notification? What do? What do you expect them to do? Approve the document, right? How do they do that? But what should they do? They should look at the document, right? So they look at the document and then they click the button. Yeah, but what do they not do? The document's still open, right? So what does your workflow do? It's got maybe it updates some metadata. What happens? It fails, right? Because the document's locked. So when you think about the process, it seems simple. That's like that thing where they say, just tell it what to do and it's going to build it, right?
Can I ask why Microsoft building tools for citizen developers?
I don't know. That is a very, very good question. But the short answer is I don't know why they don't. There's a good pattern for it, actually, for doing it. There's two patterns. If you Google this one, here's a tip. You Google that, there are two responses that you get. One of them is an API call, which closes the file, right? Is that a good idea? No, right? Don't do that one. The other one is a loop which waits for the file to unlock. Right? Yeah, right. So be careful of your approach a wee bit here. So again, as a citizen developer, you're not going to know that, right? So our job as I'm going to say professional Power Platform developers is to help them not fall into those traps. Communicate. Are things ready? We're going to deploy it. There's an update coming. Hey IT, I've done this app. Where do I put this? Where do I put my documentation? Which is the next one, the documentation of it. And the last thing I'd say is like track your time, because Power Platform is addictive. Who's got stuck into the trap of this will only take me a short bit of time to make? Ash is being very honest. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. So we all do it, right? We all get like, oh yeah, but just do one more thing, this will be done, and then next thing you know, it's Sunday. And there's a technology rule that kicks in here, which is that the higher the stress levels that you have, because the deadline is close, the more likely the chances that that problem is going to occur that you didn't expect, and the harder it's going to be to solve. So make sure that you are giving yourself time to do these things and not rushing it at the last minute. So how do you pull all this together? Well, you need to decide when you will not use the tools. Okay, so the will not is equally as important as the will, because sometimes the organisation may have another platform that they're using for this stuff. As much as we hate to admit it, Power Platform is not always the answer to every problem. So you need to choose which tool. Even within Power Platform, you should be choosing which tool you use. So we've seen an excellent demonstration of marketing this morning, which tells me you shouldn't try and build an outbound real-time marketing system using just Power Automate and an inbound Outlook mailbox where an inbound email comes into there and then it does a whole lot of fancy stuff and shoots messages off and then analyzes the result using AI Builder and then says this person is happy or sad or angry and then sends messages off in different directions. You shouldn't do that. You should probably look at using the right tool. And I'd add to that the right sized tool for the job as well. So sometimes the that decision's not so clear cut. You should definitely create a governance group to evaluate your priorities and approve projects. You should definitely design some build standards and monitor them to make sure that they're being followed. That doesn't mean coming in with a heavy hand when people don't meet the standards. It means working with them to help them get there. So it shouldn't be an enforcement activity. It should be a coaching opportunity. Okay? Vanessa's nodding, so I'm saying the right things. You need to define who can build what. So if it's an HR process, should it be being built by the person that's creating the internet that works for the comms team? Or should HR be involved? Because the form's going to be on the intranet, but the process is owned by HR. So think about who should do that. Also, is it citizen developer or professional developer? Or is it a .NET developer and not even Power Platform? Follow your plan. Who creates plans? Anyone follow them? Right, yeah, a bit shaky there, right? So yeah, follow the plan. So just if you keep the plan simple, it's easier to follow than if it's convoluted. Train your citizen developers and build their skills. Don't just leave them to it. Integrate your business improvement initiatives into the things that you're trying to achieve. So this should align with some sort of objective of the organisation. It shouldn't just be built because, oh, hey, I think we need one of these because there's a long queue at the coffee machine. So I'm going to build a coffee scheduling app where you can pre-line up. Maybe that's a good idea. Rich is going, oh, that's a good idea. It's a big queue for the coffee machine at Friday days. But, yeah. So schedule, yeah. So this is your allocated time for coffee. Yeah, don't make sure you're building things in line with the organisation's needs and strategy. And finally, make sure that you review, refine, and iterate. Okay. Things change all the time, including your knowledge of what you're doing. Rich, do you remember your first app that you built? Yeah. Yeah. Fondly?
Oh,
Yeah, lead lot. Yeah, right. So we all do. We're all the same. So when you build something the first time, you're going to learn a lot from that process. You might not necessarily have time then to go back and fix it because maybe it was good enough at the time. But you take that learning and build on things. If you do get the opportunity to go back and improve, then that's a good thing, right? And that should be part of every process for development. I talked at the start about having about where we were in terms of out of control, in control, happy, sad, that kind of thing. So I just want to talk a wee bit about cleaning up your existing stuff. So if you are lucky enough to have come into an ungoverned environment and now I've got the job of sorting it out, what should you do? So I put this slide in because it was a question that was asked in a job interview that I was sitting on the panel for last week. And the person that answered it got it completely wrong. He unfortunately for him, didn't really understand the question, I don't think. And his idea, when we got to clarify, was then he said, yes, in the last organisation I worked in, I let that happen, right? Or not quite those words, but he hadn't put any controls in place. And so when we asked him, what would you do now? He didn't really have a very good answer or any idea really. But I think the first thing that you need to do is really identify what you've got. So the owners, the purpose, and the stakeholders is a good place to start. I think the Centre of Excellence can help with identifying some of those things. Yep. And then you need to bring people back into the fold nicely. Okay. If you've got a big problem, you're not going to fix it by just going and turning stuff off because that's going to cause another set of problems. You need to have a nice planned way of doing it. And I'd say educate and encourage, provide incentives and a time frame, and ensure that you have support from the top of the organisation. This stuff is important so that it gets on people's priority lists to tidy up. And ask yourself, what else could you do? There are other things, there's plenty of other things you can do, but I think the starting point is that you've got to have a plan and bring people along on the journey with you. It might be turn it off, it's no longer needed, or put it on the roadmap for a better version to be built later. Or it might be okay, it just needs to be managed better. So what else helps? Peer learning. So in the pro software developer world, there's a thing called peer programming where you sit down together and you program. And Microsoft's bringing in some new AI in Visual Studio where because software developers are in demand, there aren't many of them, they've now replaced the person sitting next to them with some AI, making code suggestions. So now the software developers, in his dark room with his hacker t-shirt on and stuff like that, typing away, and then this little AI bot's popping up beside him saying, "Hey, have you considered this?" Do that with people though. So actually sit down, working together is a good way just to quickly learn and ask questions, back and forth, have an interactive experience. Understand the limitations and sizes. So that's things like the API calls, the number of actions that you can have, the size of data you can work with, which sounds like it's enormous. Thomas has tried some big stuff there, Thomas, way beyond what I would have been comfortable doing, but you've succeeded. So it's good to know that those numbers are quite big. So don't restrict restrict your thinking that Power Apps are just small things. They can be done used for much bigger apps, as we've seen. Don't go too wide too quickly. Pick something and focus on it. So pick Power Automate, pick Power Apps, pick one or two things. Don't try and do the entire platform because you will end up exploding and not really do very well at anything. So pick something and do it. And deep dive it is a good way to start. And then once you've deep dived, then widen your skills. You need to think about privacy. You need to understand licensing at least a little bit. There should be no excuse for not thinking about licensing. You might go, I don't understand licensing fully, but licensing is a really important part of this puzzle, so make sure you do. Understand trial licensing as well, what that means. 30 days and she's over, or you can extend it, or 30 days time, somebody doesn't actually pay for the licensing and so your stuff's not working anymore. Preview features. So preview features, before you use them, read the documentation on what the limitations are of the preview features. So there are some that are very safe to use, some that you might want to be a little bit more careful about. Just understand them before you decide how far you're going. And if you see experimental beside it, think to yourself, experimental, if I gave this to the boss and it failed, what would he think or she think? What would they think? Peer review your work. So after you've done work, actually have a look, get someone else to look at it and give you feedback. There's always things that you won't think about, no matter how long you've been doing this stuff for, that others will think about. It could be as simple as the position of buttons and things on the screen, or colours and so on, or it could be the actual flow of the app and how it works, or something deeply technical in how you've done one of your functions. If you've really gone into some trouble of building something bigger and more complicated. And then have a think about how you're going to handle change control and updates to your app as well. And so a few things to think about there. Three final thoughts from me. If you were to pick one problem in your business and pilot it, what would it be? So it's a question for all of you to have a think about. So if you're going to pilot something, what would that be? I'll add to that, who's going to be involved? Have you created a framework for your citizen developers to be successful, or are you just leaving them to it and then complaining that they get it wrong? Nobody's complaining, right? Do you want individual success or team success? So in the keynote this morning, there was a comment about individual success. So individual success is great for the individual, but sucks for the organisation, right? Individual success says to me that a lot of that knowledge is locked in one person, and if they don't share that information or provide that skill to others in the organisation, then they're not really helping the organisation get ahead. But actually, it's not good for them either, because what happens is over time, the pressure starts building up to support all of the stuff that you've built. And eventually, many years later, you'll want to retire. And you'll go, I can't because my anxiety is so high for all of the stuff that I've built. I need to keep the lights on. So it's a good idea for your own sake and for the organisation's sake that you focus on the team success and not individual success. And I think if you do these things, then you'll put the Zen and citizen inside the CIO's mind. in quick summary, citizen developers and professional developers each have something to offer to the organisation. So they both have their place. Giving people parameters to work with them will keep them on track. The Power Platform will unlock productivity if it's used well for the right things. Create a plan and follow it, and iterate, definitely iterate. So that's the end of my presentation.